I've never been so vulgar, so profane, and so goddamn naked in front of another. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I was in a very poetic mood when picking the quote of the day, so I found this quote from a book of poetry called Lovish by Sakshi Narua, and I really did just go on an absolute binge of her work. Everything that I had read from this collection and a couple other things from other collections really just enforced this beauty of impression that I have, an impressiveness for people who can put into words only what I can explain as feelings or physical sensations. And some of us are just so gorgeous at putting words to the kinds of sensitivities that others of us are like, what words can describe how I feel? Absolutely precious material if you get to check out Sakshi Narua. Incredible work. Let's talk about the 3 featured titles on the CELA homepage. You can visit the Center for Equitable Library Access by going to celalibrary.ca, C-E-L-A library.ca, and the 3 featured titles up there right now are The Whispers by Ashley Audrain. This is a suspense and thrillers that we will be talking about in exactly 1 month time, back with the girls who are joining us today, Karen McKay and Theresa Power from CELA, but they will be back because we've been anticipating reading this book together all through the summer. So we've set a date. Keep posted. The next feature title up there is The Wager by David Graham, and this is a history. And the last one is The Misses by E.L. James, and that is a romance. So figure that one out with the quote of the day today. When we do come back for a conversation with CELA friends, Theresa and Karen, we're going to be talking about Obama's Booklist. Now, you might be a huge fan, or you might be like me, not even sure what this Booklist is, but we're going to talk about it, why it's impressive, why it's unique, and how he keeps it going still after his presidency. I'm your host, Ramya Amuddin, and this is AMI Audiobook Review. You're tuned into AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks, and we're with Karen McKay and Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access. We love checking in with you two at the start of the month, and let's talk about something that maybe a lot of people follow. I'm not sure because I've never followed Barack Obama in this way, but the Obama Booklist. So how do we want to run this? We have some books that we're going to get into specifically, but Karen, do you want to give us like a load of what Obama does and why he does it this way?
Sure. So he started this, I think it was the first year of his presidency in 2009. And he released a summer reading list of, usually there's about 10 roughly books on the list. They're pretty varied. And I think that's one of the reasons that folks are interested in his reading list is that he's not attached to a certain genre or a certain type of author. He reads pretty widely. So there's usually fiction and nonfiction. There's usually very thoughtful kinds of books. They're not always ones that get a lot of press, but they're very thoughtful books or thought-invoking books for sure. And so he's released this list pretty much annually. There are 1 or 2 years somewhere sort of in the middle of his terms that I think he didn't release them. But I know that the publishers are quite interested in the books that he puts on his list, and that they usually give a little bump in sales and certainly in buzz to the books that are on the list. But I think it's just really interesting that we as a literary community tend to be interested in this, and the fact that he's still doing it after he's left office, and that it still gets as much press, I think, as it did when he was in office. And so I thought we could have a really interesting conversation about why it's important that our leaders read and why it's important that we know what they read. I don't know if you're familiar, but Jan Mattel, I hope I'm saying his name right. Please edit that out if I didn't. He released a book in 2012, and he was at an event with Stephen Harper, who was the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, who seemed not very interested in books and reading. And so Jan Martel, he started this sort of one-way book club with Stephen Harper, and every 2 weeks he'd send him a letter and a book. Yeah, it's really kind of cool. It's a one-way book club. And so he wanted to sort of explain why he thought these books were important for a leader to read. And I don't think Harper ever really engaged with him around this stuff. But anyway, he published all these letters as a book. He sent 99 before he stopped. So he sent 99 letters and 99 books. And I was doing a little bit of research, and I was wondering why he did this and why he thought it was important. And some journalist had asked him, and he said that his answer I thought was really enlightening. He said, as long as someone has no power over me, I don't care what they read or if they read at all. But once someone has power over me, then yes, their reading does matter to me, because in what they choose to read will be found what they choose to think and what they will do. And so I thought that was a really interesting framing about why it's important to talk about books, or to have leaders talk about books, or talk about the ideas that they're gaining from books, and why I think Obama's list endures, even though he's not the president any longer.
Yeah, there's just this aspect of he is well read, and former First Lady Michelle Obama also very well read, and both of them are so incredibly open about that. They get into conversation and discussions around that, and I just love that quote that you were saying about why it's important for leaders to be well read. Theresa, does it make a difference for you? Like, maybe not our politicians and leaders reading, but the books themselves that are being discussed that these people are catapulting?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I certainly like looking over this list from Obama. I actually placed a few holds myself on books because I was like, oh, that sounds like something that I should totally read. But I think that these books, and like especially Obama's list, given that it tends to be quite varied year to year, speaks to me as a person who is willing to kind of look outside his own bubble and to maybe read not only his own experiences, but like outside of his experiences as well, which I think is really important as well. If you're a political leader, that you try to understand experiences and people outside of your own, right?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's so interesting. So let's talk about, because Karen, you mentioned, Obama reads everything and anything. So I'm curious about some of the books that have come out this year and on his reading list. Where do you want to start, Karen?
So one of the ones that actually interested me is a book called Hello, Beautiful by Anne Napolitano.
Read that recently, yeah.
Oh, did you? And what did you think?
Well, interesting for sure because of the dynamics of family and characters. But also, I thought it was kind of dry. This is my very candid,
Did you?
Yes, and fresh response to it. But carry on. Let's hear what Obama has to say.
So he doesn't actually tell us much about the book, so unless he's had an interview. But this book I thought was interesting. So it pays homage to Little Women. So the characters in this book are 4 sisters, and they have similar sorts of experiences, modern day experiences, but similar to sort of the family dynamic that existed in Little Women. So if you loved Little Women, you probably would like this book. The main character is a young woman named Julia Padovano, and she meets William Waters in university, and they start to date, and Julia decides that she's going to make William her husband. William grew up in a very dysfunctional family without a lot of love. His parents had suffered some traumatic losses when he was young, and so it really impacted his sort of view of family and his experience of family, and so he's dropped into this very close-knit family And, you know, something, as always happens in books, something happens to sort of disrupt some of the family dynamics, and the characters have to decide what their way forward is. And I'm interested in the book, but one of the things that sort of interested me is that Obama reads so widely. You know, this would be often, folks would say this would be a book that might appeal more to women. But he puts this on his list, and in all of his lists, he reads widely from women, widely from people of color, widely from not just American authors, but, you know, there's usually authors from other places in the world, at least one or two on his list. And so I love that he's open about reading books that are, you know, the sorts of things that you might not expect a man like Obama to read.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this was also on Oprah's book choice.
Was.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the reasons why it was just absolutely popular. People were very interested to check it out. And so I did. As part of a book club. So I'm not sure if, Theresa, you read this book, but there are other books that you wanted to mention on Obama's book list.
Yeah, definitely. So, one that really jumped out at me was Sinner Bleed by S.A. Crosby. So this one is about Titus Crown. He is the first black sheriff of his area, and he's investigating a high school shooting of a history teacher and his killer, and the shooting leaves both of them dead. But before long, you know, as the investigation goes along, Titus uncovers evidence that kind of indicates both men participated in ritualistic killings of 7 black children who had disappeared from the area over the past several years. So the story kind of follows Titus and his deputies as they set out to find this third man. And so this book really leapt out at me because I was like, okay, so we have this person who's in a position of authority. It's set in the South, and it screams to me Attica Locke as a read alike. And I don't know if any of you have read Attica Locke, but I can count probably on one hand the number of authors that I am probably the authors that I love and I'm the most enthusiastic to read more of, and Attica Locke is one of them. And she's a writer from the States. Her first book was like 2010. Her last one was 2019, but she's only written honestly a handful of titles, maybe 5 or 6 of them. And she actually writes quite a bit for Netflix, for TV shows and for movies as well. And so for both Crosby and for Attica Locke, we find main characters, they're black, they're both part of the quote-unquote establishment, the police force, but both really struggle with that, and they struggle with the establishment itself and their place in it. In Locke's books, it's a black Texas Ranger who investigates race crimes in the South. And, you know, both are part of this establishment, and they're trying to be a driving force in changing them in one way or another. And in Locke's books, it's almost like the main character himself, just his existence as a black person on the force, is meant to really try and shake things up. And what I also really appreciate about both authors, too, is that they're really very aware of the racial struggles of black people in the particular area that they are writing about. So wherever their main characters are investigating these murders, it's not just a general experience, it's a very hyper local experience as well, which really speaks to, I think, more understanding, more nuance, and more depth. So, you know, if you love this Sinner Bleed by Crosby, and I've placed a hold on it as well to read, I would totally leap to Attica Locke as well. I think that these would be great read-alikes. Any of her books would be great compliments to this one too.
Okay, this is 2 recommendations in one, you know, Obama's recommendation and Theresa's recommendation. Well,
you know, I had to rival Obama here.
At the end of
I'm
the
just a
day,
little
right?
gal from Toronto, right? But
To one up him, obviously.
obviously, I'm gonna be tweeting at him after this. So
Okay, that's amazing. But I do appreciate the comparisons, especially if you have authors of your own that you feel strongly about in similar contexts. So this one is actually The Wager, and this is up on Sela's homepage at the moment. And you wanted to mention this one because it's on Obama's list.
yeah, I wanted to mention this one too because this one is just so wild, and I remember growing up and watching like the Mutiny of the Bounty and reading the book, and this is so much like that. So if you're into like history and like maritime um insanity and shipwrecks and all that kind of stuff, this is a would be a really interesting book. And this author is also the author of The Killers of the Flower Moon. And just to note that there's a movie actually coming out in the fall time with Leonardo DiCaprio based on that book. So this book, The Wager, follows a British vessel called The Wager, and it sounds like they were kind of made to go into service during England's war with Spain. And they ended up shipwrecked in a storm off the coast of Patagonia while chasing, and I'm not even kidding you, a silver-laden Spanish galleon. And so, although they were initially part of a fleet, by the time of the shipwreck, it sounds like the Wager like stood alone by itself, and many of its crew members had succumbed to injury, to illness, starvation, drowning, like not a good scene whatsoever. And then they have this wreckage, and more than half of them survive and find themselves on a desolate island. And so the crew begins to, become rivals against each other. And there's one guy named John Bulkelly. He's a gunner. He becomes critical of the captain who has survived. And at one point, this Kelly guy and 80 crew members take Wager's longboat and two vessels and like set off for Brazil. And they think that they left this captain guy, behind. However, they did it. They actually managed to get back to England. But da da da, Cheap is there as well. The captain that they thought that they left behind, like mutinied basically on a desert island, somehow has appeared in England as well. And he says, no, that Bukele guy, he committed mutiny, and then there's a trial. So it's like it's a real like on the edge of your seat kind of a thriller, and I almost want to say like I don't necessarily gravitate books like this myself, but like just the way it was like the blurb was kind of written about it, I was like on the edge of my seat, like holy, like what's gonna happen, like so this may have like a more of a bigger appeal with people, and the author actually used firsthand accounts, logbooks, correspondence, diaries, court-martial testimony to write the story. So it's a pretty crazy story. I know, it's wild. It's like you thought the guy was not there and he's there on the, in England, and you're like, I thought dude was dead back in wherever, but he wasn't. It's very impressive. And so I think that, if you like this book and, you want to read in that time period, or you like shipwrecks, you can't go wrong with a book by Peter Fitzsimmons on the Mutiny on the Bounty. Just the difference is that the mutiny that he writes is a fictionalized account, whereas The Wager is not. And then there's also a great book, if you want more of a Canadian take on maritime intrigue, Surviving the Elements. There's a great book called Empire of Ice and Stone by Buddy Levy, and it's about Canada's first foray into Arctic exploration, the ill-fated voyage of the Karluk in 1913. So we have both of those books in our collection as well, if you want to check them out.
Okay, great. So curious, and Karen, maybe you can jump on this. do we get a lot from Obama, going back to like his book list, about his choices? You know, does he talk a lot about why this book, why that book, what makes the cut, what makes the curation?
He doesn't really talk about it a lot, and there's some discussion that he doesn't actually curate this list, but I actually think that he does, and you know, there's some back and forth about whether publishers pitch books to him and that sort of thing. Most of them flat out deny it. I think he is a curious man and a thoughtful man, and I think reading more broadly, just apart from him specifically, but I think reading telegraphs something about our values, often about the things that we want to know more about the ways we want to spend our time, about the ways that we're interested in delving deep and questioning our own points of view and our own motivations and all that sort of thing. And so I do think that this book list of his and the ones that he's compiled over the years sort of capture where he is in his exploration of those sorts of ideas, but also where the U.S. is as a nation and where, you know, popular culture can be as well. As I said, these books are pretty broad. I think he's very intentional about selecting books that will give him, as Theresa said really eloquently, a different point of view or a window into somebody else's life. And so I think that's part of why they still resonate. You know, he's been out of office, 7 years now? Yeah.
Part of me is a little bit cynical, though, because I think that I don't know that I can actually like weigh in intelligently whether he reads them or not, but I definitely think that they are part of like a branding of him as a person, right? And you know, it shows whether he reads them or not how he wants to like portray himself in the public, especially like post office, like the way that Harry and Meghan are kind of brand themselves as well.
Yeah, no, that's a fair observation, because I was thinking the same thing. Obama's very well versed, not just with books, obviously, but with all kinds of other elements in the public eye about him, about his family, the things he kind of gets up to. And it kicked off around his campaigning and through his presidency, but it never really died off. I think we enjoy just keeping tabs. And you know, whatever has come up, the catalysts around that being his presidency is stuck around.
It's a way for him, I think, to continue to be relevant post presidency and to keep
and it's fun.
himself in. Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure.
Totally.
It's just, yeah.
I also think it's valuable in terms of influencing deeper thought and influencing the kinds of ideas that we want to talk about, especially sort of post-Trump. That, you know, he and Michelle with their institute in Chicago, you know, they're really trying to provide opportunities for people to, you know, change their station in life and all that kind of thing. And so I think that you know, he's making suggestions to folks about, these are some books that you can read that will give you different perspectives, that will give you opportunities to think about things more broadly. Like Theresa, you know, with this book, The Wager, for example, she was talking about how it's really seat of your, you know, on the edge of your seat kind of things, but also I'm sure it gets into themes about, you know, truth and themes about power and all of those sorts of things that are, you know, speak to where we are as a society these days.
And don't think that like that guy back in wherever shipwrecked on the island isn't going to come back and, you know,
like there's definitely some messaging happening there. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, you guys, thank you so much. This is definitely a first for me. I've never dived any kind of way into Obama's book list, but it's been very insightful. And Theresa, you've, I'd say, succeeded in winding up Obama with your recommendations, your parallels.
Can I quote you on that? I'm going to put that on my LinkedIn
in
page.
Context, of course. Awesome. Carrie and Theresa, we'll chat with you next month.
Great. Thanks so much.
Theresa Power and Karen McKay from the Center for Equitable Library Access talking to us on AMI Audiobook Review to kick off the month. We have lots more episodes coming your way in August, of course. And until next week, happy audiobook listening.
AMI's Described Video Guide lists television programming available for viewers who are blind or partially sighted. From dramas to sitcoms, documentaries to movies, children's programming to animated series, AMI's Described Video Guide has it all. For a comprehensive list of described television programming in Canada, visit ami.ca/dvguide or call toll-free 1-855-855-1144. I'm Greg David, Communication Specialist at AMI.